My name is Madison. I'm 24 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas. A few months ago, I graduated from a tech university and landed my first full-time job as a software developer at a startup downtown. It should have been the beginning of an exciting new chapter, a fresh start. But life rarely sticks to the script. Instead of celebrating, I found myself standing in front of my own house, my mother's house, with a suitcase in one hand and a key in the other that no longer fit the lock. I still remember the chill that ran down my spine when I first turned the key, and it didn't budge. At first, I thought I was just tired. The sun was bright, and I'd spent half the day traveling back from out of state. Maybe I was using the wrong key, or maybe the lock was stiff. I tried again, jiggling it, hoping the door would swing open like it always used to. But nothing happened. That house, the one I grew up in, the one my mom, Elise, had worked so hard for, suddenly felt foreign. Mom had been a real estate agent, successful, independent, and full of quiet strength. She bought the house on her own long before she met my dad. I remember how proud she was of it. "This house is your safety net," she'd tell me. "No matter what happens, you'll always have a roof over your head." She was always like that, planning ahead, taking care of everything. Even after she passed, I could still hear her voice echoing in the halls she once walked. She died from a heart attack when I was 19, just weeks before I left for college. One moment she was texting me about what size comforter I needed for my dorm, and the next she was gone. Just like that. It shattered me in a way I still can't fully describe. But she had left a will, detailed, organized, just like her. The house, her savings, all of it was mine. At least that's what I thought. After the funeral, my dad, Greg, showed up with his new family, his wife Tamara and their son, Caleb, who was only 6 back then. They hadn't been around much before that. Greg left us when I was 10, traded his family life for someone else, and never looked back. He never fought for custody, never argued about money. He just left. Cold, clean, and quick. Tamara was a nurse, polite but distant, and Caleb was too young to understand anything. When they moved in after Mom's funeral, it was supposed to be temporary. I didn't question it at the time. I was too broken to care. Greg told me they'd stay just for a while, to help me cope, to look after the house while I was away at school. "We'll keep the place running, so you don't have to worry about anything," he said. Tamara nodded along, smiling in that polite, practiced way she had. I didn't have the strength to think it through, so I said yes. For 4 years, it all seemed fine, maybe even good. I visited during holidays and summer breaks. Tamara would cook big dinners and say things like, "Your favorite, chicken Alfredo, right?" Like she'd known me all my life. Caleb would drag me into his room to show me Lego sets or drawings. Even Greg started acting like more of a dad again, asking about my classes, my projects, my plans. We started having weekly phone calls. They kept up the house, or so it seemed. Tamara even sent photos of new curtains or flowers she'd planted, always signing off with, "Hope you're proud of how we're keeping it up." It felt like maybe we were building something, a weird, patchwork kind of family. Not perfect, but it worked. But now, standing at that locked front door, something didn't feel right. I knocked hard. After a few seconds, Tamara opened the door, wearing an apron and dusted with flour, like she'd been baking. Her expression dropped the moment she saw me. "Madison? What are you doing here?" she asked, voice tight with surprise. I wheeled my suitcase inside, my stomach twisting. "I live here," I said slowly. "I graduated last week, remember? I told Dad I was coming home." Inside, Greg was sitting in the living room, tablet in hand. Caleb was sprawled on the couch, his phone in front of his face. Both of them looked just as shocked. I glanced around. The furniture was mostly the same, but something was different. Subtle changes in decor, pictures I didn't recognize, a faint vanilla scent instead of Mom's favorite lavender. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a place I was visiting. Greg stood up, rubbing his neck, that nervous tick he always had when something was wrong. "About the locks," he started. I changed them last month. Just a precaution. There were some break-ins nearby." I stared at him. "You didn't think to mention that? Or send me a new key?" "We weren't expecting you this soon," Tamara cut in, folding her arms. She wasn't smiling anymore. You said you'd come later in the summer. No, I said. I told you both. I start work next week. Greg cleared his throat. Can we talk in the office? He led me into what used to be Mom's office, her books still on the shelves, her framed certificates still on the wall. He shut the door behind us and didn't speak for a moment. I need to tell you something, he said finally, not meeting my eyes. Tamara, she thinks this house is mine. That I gave it to your mom when we were married, and after she died, it reverted to me. I blinked.
What?
You know that's not true. I know, he said quickly. But I never told her. I didn't want to cause problems. I thought I'd tell her eventually. But then one thing led to another, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For 4 years, they had lived here under my roof. Tamara thought she owned the place. Greg had lied to her, to me, to himself. I have to tell her, I said. Please, Mads, he said, stepping forward. Just give me a little time. I'll talk to her. I just don't want to ruin everything. I looked at him, at the man who left me and my mom like we were nothing. And now he was asking for time to protect his new family? He handed me a set of keys.
Here.
I had spares made. My hand closed around the cold metal. My whole world tilted. Nothing about this was okay. But I nodded anyway.
Fine.
A few weeks. But you fix this. I walked out of the office and back into the house, my house, and it felt more like enemy territory than home. I could already feel the shift. I just didn't know how much worse it would get. I tried to pretend things were fine, at least for the first few days. I told myself I could live with a little awkwardness. After all, it was just temporary. Greg would talk to Tamara, clear things up, and we could all move forward. I didn't want drama. I just wanted to settle into my new job and figure out how to live in a house that didn't feel like mine anymore, even though it was. But things weren't fine. Not even close. The change in Tamara was almost immediate. Her politeness vanished, replaced by an icy stiffness that filled every corner of the house. She stopped greeting me in the mornings. Instead, she'd sigh when I walked into a room, like I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome. She stopped making coffee, even though she knew I loved it, and if I left a mug in the sink, she'd make a loud show of washing it, muttering something about grown adults not cleaning up after themselves. Caleb changed too. He used to run to me when I came home on breaks, always eager to tell me what was new in school or show me his latest video game obsession. Now he barely looked up when I entered the room. He'd whisper to Tamara when I was around, then giggle like I was some unwanted joke in the background of their perfect little family. One night, while we were sitting around the dinner table, the shift became impossible to ignore. Tamara set 3 plates on the table, exactly 3. Hers, Greg's, and Caleb's. I stood in the doorway, confused. Oh, she said, glancing over her shoulder. I didn't know if you'd be eating with us. I stared at her. Why wouldn't I be? She shrugged. Just assumed you'd be going out with friends or something. I didn't want to waste food. Greg kept his eyes on his plate, cutting into his chicken like it was suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. I felt like I was watching a play where everyone knew their lines, except me. Later that night, I overheard Tamara on the phone. She was talking to someone, her sister, I think, and her voice carried easily through the vent. Madison's still here, she said. It's like she thinks this is her place. I swear if she doesn't move out soon. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. I started spending less time at home. I'd take long walks around the neighborhood or grab coffee and sit in my car just to have a moment of peace. I started visiting old high school friends like Kelsey and David, both of whom still lived in town. With them, I could laugh and relax, even if only for a little while. But every time I came back to the house, it was like stepping into enemy territory. The worst part wasn't even Tamara. It was Greg. He didn't say much. He never yelled or snapped. But his silence was louder than any outburst. He let Tamara treat me like I was intruding. He let her erase the parts of the house that still felt like Mom, replacing her floral curtains with dull gray ones, moving her favorite armchair into the garage, and even suggesting we repaint the living room. I overheard her one day saying, It's time to make this house ours. And Greg just agreed. That same evening, while I was making myself a sandwich, Tamara came into the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, arms folded, and looked at me like she was preparing for a negotiation. "I think it's time you started looking for your own place," she said, casual like she was discussing the weather. I blinked. "I just started my job. I'm still getting settled." "You're 24, Madison," she replied. "You should be living independently, not clinging to your father's house." I set my knife down slowly. "This isn't my father's house." She tilted her head, like I'd said something ridiculous. "Oh, please. Greg's name is on everything. He took care of the place when your mother passed. You think a 19-year-old inherited a house like this?" I didn't answer. I just walked away because anything I said would have turned into a fight. And I wasn't ready for that yet. But something in me had started to shift. A quiet rage that had been building since the day I returned. It grew stronger every time Tamara moved one of Mom's things, every time Caleb called me that girl on the phone, and every time Greg sat there and did nothing. 2 weeks into my job, I came home from work on a Saturday morning and immediately noticed something was wrong. The house was too quiet. No TV, no cooking noises, no Caleb's music blasting from his room. I called out, but no one answered. I checked the bedrooms. Empty. The driveway was clear. No car. I pulled out my phone and tried calling Greg. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. I called Tamara. She answered on the 4th ring, just as I was about to hang up. "What do you want?" she snapped. I could hear music in the background, beachy, upbeat, with the sound of waves crashing nearby. "Where are you guys?" I asked, stunned. She laughed. "We're in Hawaii. Didn't Greg tell you?"
No, he didn't.
"Well, that's awkward. We figured you'd be fine holding down the fort. Thought it'd be nice to get away, just the 3 of us." Her voice turned sharper. "Honestly, Madison, this situation has gone on long enough. You're freeloading, whether you admit it or not. You're not a child anymore. It's not your job to cling to the past just because you can't build a future." I gripped the phone so tightly I thought it might crack. "This is my house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Keep telling yourself that," she said and hung up. That was the moment something snapped. I sat down on the edge of the couch, Mom's old couch, and looked around at everything that had changed. The curtains, the wall colors, even the smell of the place. It wasn't just that Tamara had tried to take over the house. She'd tried to erase Mom, erase me, and Greg let her. No more waiting. No more hoping he'd do the right thing. I knew what I had to do, and I was done asking for permission. The house felt emptier than ever after that call, but not in the sad, hollow way I might have expected. It was quiet, yes, but the silence was different now. It felt like breathing room.
Space to think.
I stood in the kitchen, still holding my phone, staring at the cupboards Tamara had reorganized, the tacky vase she'd put on the counter, the magnets from places I'd never visited clinging to the fridge. My house had been twisted into something unrecognizable, and I had let it happen. But no more. That same afternoon, I started packing. Not my stuff, theirs. I went room by room, carefully but quickly, boxing up all of Tamara's expensive clothes, Greg's golf gear and Caleb's toys, schoolwork and gaming equipment. I labeled each box clearly, stacking them neatly in the garage. I didn't break anything, didn't throw things out, though I wanted to. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine. Every photo of their vacations, every framed family moment that didn't include me, all of it went into the boxes. I found Mom's favorite lamp shoved in the back of a closet, hidden under a pile of holiday decorations. I brought it back into the living room and set it in its original spot, right next to the couch. I cried for a moment, not because I was sad, but because for the first time in years, I finally felt like Mom's presence was returning. The next morning, I called a locksmith. He arrived within an hour. He was polite, fast, and didn't ask questions. By the time he left, the locks on every door were changed. It cost a lot, nearly everything from my last paycheck, but I didn't care. He handed me a new set of keys, and I held them tight like they were the final piece of armor I hadn't known I needed. Over the next few days, I rearranged the house. Not to how it was before exactly, but to something closer to it. Something closer to mine. I repainted the kitchen, moved Mom's books back to their original shelves in the office, and took down the bland art Tamara had hung over the fireplace. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. When Friday came, I left work feeling steady. Nervous, yes, but steady. I knew they were coming back. I wasn't sure what would happen, but I was ready for it. I pulled into the driveway just as their rental car parked on the curb. Tamara stepped out first, sunglasses still on, her face quickly turning red as she saw me walking up the steps with calm purpose. Greg got out next, his mouth opening slightly as if he was about to speak but couldn't. Caleb stood behind them, quieter than usual, clutching a souvenir bag from the airport. Tamara didn't wait. "What the hell is this?" she shouted. "You locked us out?" I turned around slowly and looked her straight in the eyes.
Yes.
I did. "You can't do that," she barked, storming toward me. "This is our house. You have no right." Greg said nothing. His eyes darted to the front door, to me, then to Tamara. He looked like a man caught between two fires, but unwilling to move from the flames. "No, Tamara," I said, keeping my voice level. "This house has always belonged to me. My mother bought it. She left it to me in her will. You've only been living here because I let you." She scoffed, glancing at Greg. "Tell her she's lying. Greg, say something." But Greg didn't say a word. He just looked down at the pavement. "You knew," I said softly, watching his silence fold in on itself. "You knew the truth, and you still let her believe the lie." Tamara's confidence faltered. She blinked rapidly, her voice cracking. You didn't have to do this. We were a family." "No," I replied. "You treated me like a guest. Like I didn't belong. Like I was a burden in my own home." She stepped closer, her voice suddenly syrupy. "Madison, come on. Don't throw everything away over a misunderstanding.
We can talk about this.
We can figure it out. Let's just go inside." "No." I cut her off. "You're not coming back in." She opened her mouth to protest, but I pointed to the garage. "Your things are there. Everything's packed." Tamara looked like she wanted to scream, and maybe she would have, but Greg placed a hand on her shoulder and shook his head. Caleb stood silently behind them, his face unreadable. They made 3 trips to load the boxes into the car.
No one said anything.
The last box went in just as the sun began to set. Greg walked back to the door one last time, hesitation all over his face. "Madison," he said quietly, "I messed up. I know that. I was trying to protect what I built with them, but I should have protected you." I didn't say anything. "Can we fix this?" he asked, voice breaking. "Please." I shook my head, not out of anger, but out of understanding. Some things break and don't need fixing. They just need to be let go. He nodded slowly. I closed the door behind me, locked it, and leaned against it as they finally drove away. I felt like I'd been holding my breath for years. Finally, I could exhale. After the door shut behind them, I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet. No yelling. No fake laughter. No footsteps that weren't mine. Just silence, the kind that finally felt peaceful instead of cold. I sat down on the couch, the one my mom had picked out years ago, and stared at the walls I had just repainted. They looked brighter somehow, like the house was breathing again. Like I was. The next morning, I made coffee in a clean kitchen, took it out to the front porch, and watched the sun come up. It felt like the first morning in forever where I wasn't holding my breath. No more hiding. No more pretending. The house felt different now, not haunted or heavy, just mine. Fully, finally mine. That Monday, I went to work like normal. My desk at the startup was still by the window, and the view of downtown Austin hadn't changed, but everything inside me had. I was sharper, more focused. I threw myself into my work, into learning and growing and building something that no one could take away. Rachel, a designer on my team, noticed. "You're glowing lately," she said over lunch one day. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I just smiled. I didn't explain. Greg tried calling that week from a new number. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that started with "Hi, sweetheart," and ended with "Please call me back, I miss you." I deleted it. A few days later, another unknown number popped up. I ignored it too. I knew it was him. He'd had years to speak up, to be honest, to protect me and honor my mother's wishes. He hadn't. He stood by and let someone else tear me down in my own home. Now, I didn't know him anything. I heard through a neighbor that they'd moved to an apartment across town, a small place near a strip mall. Tamara had been complaining about the rent and the noise. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt. Just distance, finally. Inside the house, I kept rebuilding. Not physically, though I did repaint the guest room and swap out some furniture, but emotionally. I took out Mom's old records, the ones I hadn't touched since she passed, and played them while I cooked. I sat on the porch in the evenings, just like she used to, sipping tea and watching the world go by. I planted new roses in the backyard, right beside the garden she'd once kept. She used to say roses were strong because they survived even when ignored. I understood that better now. Sometimes I still think about Caleb. He was just a kid caught in the middle. Maybe one day, when he's older, he'll remember the sister who used to help him build Lego castles and listen to him ramble about superheroes. Maybe he'll reach out. If he does, I'll decide then. For now, I needed distance from all of them. I also think about Tamara, about how quickly she turned cruel when she thought she was losing control. All that warmth she once showed me, the meals, the smiles, the shared holidays, they weren't real. They were performances. And when I stopped playing my part, she couldn't hide it anymore. But the person I think about the most is my mom.
Elise.
The woman who planned ahead, who made sure I was taken care of even when she wasn't around to see it. She knew this might happen, and she put everything in place to protect me. She didn't just leave me a house. She left me strength, a place to return to, a foundation to rebuild my life on when the people who should have cared didn't. And I did rebuild. I'm still rebuilding. But this time, I'm doing it on my terms. Sometimes, people talk about healing like it's soft and gentle. But for me, healing meant setting boundaries. Saying no. Locking doors. Standing up for myself, even when it meant standing alone. It meant understanding that family isn't just blood or who shares a dinner table with you. It's who shows up when it matters. It's who tells the truth when it's hard. It's who sees you fully and doesn't try to take anything from you. Some bridges don't need mending. Some need to burn so you never walk back into the fire again. This house, the one my mom left me, doesn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It feels like a home.
My home.
The floors creak in familiar places. The walls hold memories I've chosen to keep. And the future I'm building here is one I no longer have to share with people who treated me like I didn't belong. I don't pick up Greg's calls anymore. I don't wait for apologies that won't come or conversations that would only reopen wounds I've already closed. I'm not angry. I'm free. And that, more than anything, is the ending I deserve.